Hi, I'm Terry Kolath, and I'm here today with Professor Adrian Kerr. We're not talking about a class specifically, but we are talking about Professor Adrian Kerr. He's been coming to teach in our academy for a number of years, a fascinating person, and he talks very little about himself, except for today. Thank you for joining me, Adrian.
Thank you, Terry. It's always a pleasure to be at Shell Point.
Well, it occurs to me that there are many people who would like to know a little bit more about your fascinating person, dual citizenship, UK and America, and it gives you such a perspective when you teach a class and take us through the history of something, when you give us both perspectives. So tell us a little bit, where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in that very peaceful part of the world called Northern Ireland in the 60s.
Really?
I went to school, of course, and in high school I had the pleasure of having a mother who was Methodist and a father who was Presbyterian, so we used to alternate Sundays, different churches, and all sorts of other events. So I was brought up in an extremely rigorous religious environment, and my great-grandparents had been missionaries all their lives. In those days, when you were missionaries, you said goodbye to your home country, and you went out, in this case to Sri Lanka, Ceylon in those days, for life, until you reached retirement age, which was, in those days was time off for tropical areas. So they came back at 60, and they were actually then given retirement in a retirement home for missionaries, which you recognize, of course, here.
Yes.
And they were presented by their parishioners with a Bible, and I have that Bible, and it was presented by the parishioners of Warrington area to these two folk who've given up their whole lives to be missionaries in Sri Lanka.
Your grandparents?
They're my grandparents. And then when I went out to India a few years back, I said, I'm going to take a side trip to south of Ceylon, Sri Lanka today, Colombo, because that's where their mission was. And I thought, oh, it'll be a high-rise flat or a parking garage or a mall. Anyway, I walked through the back streets because I knew the address, and there it was. It hadn't changed. And there's still missionaries converting Tamil Nadu people, Tamils, into Christianity. Rather small numbers, but it's still going on all these years later, 50, 60 years later.
Did they talk to you about Sri Lanka? Do you remember having conversations?
Photographs. Those photographs I still have. So it's them in the mission and dealing with the local Sri Lankans who were very simple farmers and subsistence hunter-gatherers in those days. It wasn't a big metropolis like it is today. But going to church as a 14 or 15-year-old boy, these Presbyterian sermons seemed to go on for decades, and it was hard to focus until I heard words like Pharaoh and pyramids and Moses and Exodus and Assyrians and wars and Ninevehs and Babylons, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I went to the pastor and I said, could you teach me about the Bible, the Old Testament? And so he took me under his wing, and for probably 4 or 5 months I would go for Bible classes in the evenings after school once a week, and we would go through Kings 1, Kings 2, Chronicles 1 and 2, all the historical aspects of the Old Testament, and I was just lapping it all up. And then as time went on, he realized I was really interested in the historical aspects of the Old Testament.
You weren't going into the ministry.
And when he realized I wasn't signing up to become a missionary in Sri Lanka, he said, I'm not sure this is worth pursuing, Adrian. I said, yeah, you're probably right.
Interesting.
So I went off to university, and then when
Where did you go?
I went to Leeds University in the north of England, and when I graduated, I said I will work for anybody who will give me an international assignment for as long as you can think of, and in the Middle East, because that was my passion. Having got bitten by the Middle East bug, I really wanted to visit places like Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, of course, and Turkey. And Shell Oil in those days were offering international assignments straight out of university. So I said, where do I sign? And I went on an 18-year, 6 3-year assignments in the Middle East, and I loved it. And
what did you do?
Well, part of me was doing marketing of oil products, and then the last few years was training Arabs. And the biggest project was Shell at that time was trying to get equity oil from Saudi Arabia, and all the American companies had it sewn up. So newcomers like Shell were trying to elbow their way into an established club, Aramco. What did we have to offer? So the Saudis had all of this is Sheikh Imani, who was in charge in those days, and he would say, well, what have you got to offer? We've got all the technology and all the management and all the support services from the American Aramco partners, so why should we give you the opportunity to have equity oil? And so we scratched our heads for a while and said, well, they've got all this, so what haven't they got? And I went back to the Ministry of Oil Petroleum, and I said, how about if we train your young men to become oil refinery and petrochemical workers? And they said, oh, that's a good idea. So they said, you go out to the desert and interview camel herders' sons and select the 200 best and train them, and then bring them back from your training establishments fully trained, ready to slide into their job as oil refinery workers. And so we herded them literally like camels to Jeddah airport one day, and we put one lot on a plane to Manchester in England, where we had a technical college who was going to train them, and the other lot to Houston, Texas, where there's a technical college, community college, who was doing this oil. There aren't many universities and colleges who actually train people to be oil refinery workers and give them a technical certificate or diploma. So that was a 2-year program.
So you actually brought people from the Middle East who had barely
never been outside the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, hardly could speak English.
So you immersed yourself in their culture as they were immersing in our culture.
Yes.
We are going to stop here, and we will have a part 2 in the near future.
Good.
Professor Adrian Kerr, stand by for part 2.